Before you dive into your 2021 strategy, have you asked yourself these questions? Because if you haven't, you might be missing out on something that could make a difference for you in 2021. So let's dive in. Banana. Let's switch seats then.
It didn't knock the shelf over.
Oh, yeah, it's going to be fun to edit. Can you scooch a little bit?
No, I can't. There's a shelf here.
Well, you got to scoot the chair in and over. Switchy, switchy. You okay? You're kind of blurry. I say undo that next button. Okay.
We were already recording?
Yeah. It's good pre-show. Funny stuff.
Awesome.
It's really not set up to do this with two people, but we're making it work. How's this? Super ideal.
Yeah.
So let's talk strategy. Hey movers. It's Sally Z with Be Moved. Let's go create some talks that will move this world. We're going to talk with amazing speakers, share tips, tricks, resources, and we are going to be moved so that our audience can be moved. This moved me. What is moving you? Hey everybody, welcome back to This Moved Me. My name is Sally Z. I am your virtual speaker coach, and I empower purpose-driven entrepreneurs and change makers like you to leverage speaking on behalf of your business and your idea and unleash your authentic voice so that you can grow your impact, grow your audience, and finally leave self-doubt and obscurity in the dust. Today on the show, we are talking about your pre-plan plan. That's right, like what you need to do before you finalize your plan and step into 2021. Because before we can say goodbye to 2020, which can we just say, I am not sad about this and I am excited to say goodbye to 2020. But before we can do that and like put 2020 in the rear view mirror forever, we have to first do a few things. Now, this is not in my nature. By nature, I just want to focus on the future and the possibilities and how things are looking up and onward, people. Like, that is deep. That is deep for me. But I am bringing a guest on with us today to help slow me down a little bit and to think about some things that we've got to think about before we can dive into 2020. Because we might miss out on something that could make a huge difference. I don't want to do that. I really don't. So let's do what we can here before we rush off to 2021. Good riddance, 2020, but let's just slow down. Now, before we get into the episode too deeply, I want to take a moment and talk about our sponsor for today's show, which is the new Movers U. Now, Movers U is my new online membership experience that is created for you to help up-level your speaking so that you can use your voice to grow your impact and grow your audience. It is really designed to support you through all the seasons in our speaking, content development, delivery development, mindset development, and growing the business side of your speaking. In other words, getting more eyes and ears on your stuff. So right now, I am offering a founding member price for the first 50 people who join me through December or until those spots run out, whichever comes first. So spots are already filling up. So I really want to encourage you to join us in the new Movers U. For $29 a month, which is honestly kind of bonkers, you get one masterclass either teaching from me, or we invite in a guest expert and have an interview or conversation at masterclass level. You get one Q&A with me in the month. You get one hot seat live coaching experience, which are so powerful and so fun. And as a bonus right now, you get access to all of our mini courses in Movers U, including the Sassy Speaker Prep course, which is a really powerful framework, the Virtual Speaker Toolkit, which, hello, I'm ready to say goodbye to 2020, but virtual speaking is not going away. It's a $29 investment to get started. That's it, $29. Come check it out. Join us in Movers U and step into 2021 feeling more confident in your skills, see growth in your ability to show up, to share your story, to get more visible with your audience, and at the same time, grow some speaking revenue. Yeah. So go to bemoved.com/join-movers-the-letter-U. Okay, let's get on to our show. Today's guest is someone who I admire a lot. I do. I admire him a lot. He's super smart. He's got this really fascinating background that includes both performing as an improviser and a speaker and really extensive experience in leadership and strategy and operations. He's led a multi-million-dollar organization. He consults with teams to develop positive culture and think more operationally. And he's my husband. Yay! It's fun. I haven't had Andy on the show in a few years. He's doing the dishes right now. Bless his heart. Somebody's going to do the dishes around here. Oh my gosh. Thanks, Andy. Here's the deal. I get to pick his brain all the time. And he and I have very similar values and similar goals, but super different ways of thinking. We're pretty different people. And so I really benefit from his operational brain, his strategic thinking. And as I'm wanting to support all of you as you are trying to grow your speaking and be more visible with your audience and leverage speaking on behalf of your business and your idea, part of it is thinking more strategically and more operationally. So I thought, how about I share one of my secret weapons, which is Andy, with all of you? So I'm really excited to bring him on the show. Here he is, Andy Zimney. As we are all shifting into, okay, I cannot wait for 2021. I cannot wait to say goodbye to 2020. Good riddance 2020. I've got big plans for 2021. And we're just like, for me, as a 7 on the Enneagram, as an ENFP, all the things that are identifiers as we think about how we do what we do. I'm the person who's like future focused. I don't want to think about the past year and all the challenges and the struggles with it. I just want to plan for the future and think about potential and possibility. And I love starting. So I'm trying to just slow myself down in that process and say, okay, before I dive in head first, before I'm just like, bye-bye, I don't even want to think about the last year. Like, what do I need to do that? And part of the setup, part of what I'm kind of inviting people into is I'm going to be doing a strategy session with people on the 14th, December 14th, about planning their speaking part of their business. So we're going to talk about what 2021 looks like for you. But before we get there, before we do that, there's some things we need to do first. So that's what I want to pull out from you is what's the kind of prep that we need to do? What are some questions we need to be asking ourselves? What's some helpful analysis to do of the past that doesn't get us bogged down in that, but becomes helpful information for the future?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. Like anytime I'm facilitating strategic planning with any of my clients, we generally are taking some time to look backwards before we look forwards. Not, not to get mired in the past, not to beat ourselves up, but because our past is valuable lesson learning territory. If we're not, it's like the old, if you don't examine history, if you don't study history, you're doomed to repeat it.
That feels important right now. That feels really important.
And 2020 is there's a big asterisk next to that as well, because 2020 is very different than most of the past years that we maybe have had these conversations, and probably won't set the template for 2021 in some ways. And there are still things that are going to carry through and lessons to be learned. So.
Okay. Before we dive into this, I wanted to get your input on this because it kind of hit me hard. And that was, I was listening to something Michael Hyatt was talking about. I'm going to his planning session. That's, I think, sometime this coming week. I don't remember when. I don't know. Calendar is not in front of me. I don't know what's happening. But he was saying, if you are using 2020 as an excuse in the challenges of your business, essentially, like, it's not an excuse. You can't, it's a failure of your leadership, essentially, to say, well, I didn't do very well this year on this because 2020. And I was like, ooh, wow, that kind of that hit me. So I'm just curious on your input on that, because of course there's some truth in there that we use. There were a lot of people who were hit by 2020 and then pivoted and did something even better or bigger or different or whatever. It became a launch pad for them in some ways. But that's
I think you're kind of hitting on one of the things we were talking about, just how we wanted to approach this conversation. One of the challenges to it is, I think there's very little one-size-fits-all advice out there. So, I certainly, absolutely, we can all use 2020 to excuse and use as blame all sorts of things on 2020. And there could be some dangers in doing that, right? To let ourselves off the hook, for sure. I think to not acknowledge the challenges of 2020 and to take a swing all the way to the other side of the spectrum and say no excuses, like if you failed, you can't blame 2020. I think that's
tell that to a restaurant owner,
exactly,
or not that there weren't things that some restaurants absolutely shifted their game and were innovative. And I think that's what he's saying, is we can't just sit back and be like, meh.
I think if you went through the last 8 months and just stuck to your original plan and never expanded your scope to see, okay, what sort of adjustments, how do we need to respond? Again, even then, I don't know there's much utility in beating yourself up over that for very long. Shift to a learning mindset and say, well, maybe that was a mistake. Now, if you scanned things, did some assessment and said, I think we got to stay the course because our plan still makes sense in 2020 and didn't work. I mean, that happens every year, every business. Sometimes you set a strategy on good information, good instincts, some good educated guesses, and things still don't work. Sometimes they do, etc. That's it. Kind of goes back to when you're planning for the future. I think it's useful to take a look at where you've been, take a look at where you are, and then take a look forward. Look back, again, not to beat yourself up, but look back for lessons. And look for the hard lessons. There's also hopefully some successes, some silver linings in there to draw on as well.
Okay, so that's really the frame that you're setting up for us. Before we dive into really specific strategic planning for 2021, you want us to, as you just said, look back. Where have we been? Where are we at right now? And where are we going? Just kind of a general direction of where we're going. Okay, so let's dive into that a little more specifically. When you say, where have we been?
Yeah.
How do we do that? How do we helpfully look back without being too hard on ourselves?
Yep.
Taking the helpful lessons and then
yep.
bringing that with us and leaving everything else.
Well, if you went into 2020 with a strategic plan.
Big dreams. Big dreams.
Big dreams.
2020.
If you
it's going to be a big year.
If you had a document, that's an obvious starting place for looking back and sort of reviewing the year.
You need a document? What do you mean?
A document's going to help a lot. So if you, a year ago, did some 2020 planning and set some goals, some strategies, etc. That's often a typical starting place for a business or a team. Say, okay, here is our plan, and essentially, let's grade ourselves on how we did against our plan. Now, a lot of folks went in 2020 with a plan, and as the pandemic hit and everything else in 2020, elements of that plan may not have been as relevant. Mm-hmm. Hopefully, you adjusted your plan and maybe reset some goals. Mm-hmm. So you still have a document, maybe it changed over the course of the year, but you're winding out 2020 with some roadmap, some itinerary that you were shooting for. Even if you didn't do that reset, it's still a useful place to at least start looking at 2020.
So like a year ago, this is what we were thinking.
Yeah.
And it's kind of just a marker in time.
Right.
That's helpful.
Yeah. Okay. And you probably, there's at least some amount of intentional thinking went into that plan. Mm-hmm. So use that. Now, every year requires some honest reflection, some candor with ourselves, with our teams. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we get an A+ on those elements we put in that plan. Sometimes we get a C, a D, or we fail outright. Mm-hmm. Have some honesty with yourself. Have some grace as well.
Trying to find the balance between being really honest about what happened, but not beating yourself up.
I mean, I think getting a bad grade is only useful if it propels you towards some better grade in the future.
It's just information.
Right.
It's information.
It's information. So if you went into 2020 with some sort of revenue goal and you did not hit that goal, you came in somewhere short, that's the beginning of the conversation. And then the next part of the conversation is why? Why did we end up where we did? Certainly the pandemic is going to play into that conversation. Some of the things we talked about around the pivots you made, how did those help? How did those not help, et cetera? It's understanding how you ended up with that final grade. That's really the useful part of the conversation.
Right. The context.
Yeah.
Okay. So once you have a document that you've assessed and you've identified, at least to some degree, like here's the information, here is the marking in time, and some context around.
Yeah. So I should say, let's say you didn't have a document.
Okay.
That sort of looking back process is still, don't think that you can't do some reflection. This can be as simple as taking out a sheet of paper or flip chart or whiteboard or whatever, and just jotting down, if you're on your own, do it on your own. If you've got a team, do it with your team. What went well in 2020? What didn't go well? What did we learn? This can be a very informal process.
So document sounds, super official. Context.
What a document is going to do is ground you in what you set out to do originally. If you don't have that document, our memories tend to be pretty fluid.
That's a nice way of putting it, fluid. Yes, sometimes it does feel like he's just talking directly to me.
No, if I am, it's because you share the characteristics of lots of folks.
That's true. I tend to do that. Okay.
Plans are about setting a plan, obviously, but as much as anything, they're about accountability. So that's what these conversations, part of what these conversations around is around holding ourselves accountable to our goals. If you don't have the document, it's much harder to hold yourself accountable to them, which is why sometimes we don't put this stuff down on paper, because we'd prefer not to be accountable to them.
Okay, so there's some important stuff in there around holding yourself accountable, what helps you hold yourself accountable. So then that brings us to where we are. How do we assess where we are? So one of the questions that's underneath this for me is, sometimes I feel like I don't have the right perspective, or because I'm so close to it and I want something so much that sometimes I'm missing signs, or I'm missing, other opportunities, because I'm just like, I gotta do this thing, right? So in all of this, how do we, especially with getting an accurate picture on where we are, how do you keep the right perspective? Do you need outside people to help you see clearly? Like, for speakers, I'm always saying you need to invite other people in to help you see clearly. So is that true also with just assessing our own strategy?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think I agree. Like a speaker trying to develop a talk, having an outside perspective, having a coach, having prospective audience members give you feedback on where you're at is going to be infinitely more useful than just stuck in your own little bubble and self-assessing. So I think the same is absolutely true when looking at your business. If you are on your own, you don't have any employees, you don't have any partners, etc. I don't think that prohibits you from getting outside perspective, right? Find some people that you do trust, tap into some clients, family members, what have you.
Mentors.
Hire a coach, hire a strategy person to do a little crash session with
Community groups. I mean, I feel like Facebook, as problematic as Facebook is, the groups inside Facebook are a goldmine of connections and network and just not feeling alone. And so, if
you're not part of some mastermind group, this is a great time to assemble some sort of mastermind group for each other, to give each other some perspective on where you're at. And I think that conversation, again, you don't have to overcomplicate this. Go back to documentation. If you're running your business with some basic level of financial sophistication, pulling up your balance sheet, looking at the checking account, looking at your bank statements is one way of assessing where your business is currently at. Looking at the scorecard on your strategic plan, if you have that, is a way of assessing where you're at. And just taking a blank sheet of paper and sort of documenting, a classic way of approaching this is a SWOT conversation. SWOT stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. Strengths and weaknesses are really focused internally. What strengths do we have? What are our core competencies right now? You may have developed some new skills, new strengths in 2020 because it's pushed us. Weaknesses were the things that we need to develop throughout the business. Opportunities and threats are looking more externally. So obviously in 2020, the pandemic was a threat that impacted a lot of us, the economy, et cetera, shifting needs for clients, shifting priorities for clients. And then there were a lot of opportunities as well in 20 and will be in 2021. As remote work, even once the vaccine is out there, remote work isn't going away. Virtual conferences are going to have a much bigger footprint than they had. There's opportunities in there, right? As the geographic boundaries get softer, more permeable.
I actually think the speaking opportunities have increased. They're just different kinds. And it's requiring us to be super flexible. But
so with that SWOT, you're not looking for priorities yet. You're just getting a lay of the land, what the landscape, what the ecosystem looks like. I think sometimes folks confuse the SWOT as being a planning document. A SWOT is not a plan. A SWOT is just a snapshot of where you're at.
That's all super helpful. You mentioned a few other things. There's a lot of tools out there. Is there any one thing that you're like, for sure do this? Or is it like, just find a consistent thing? In other words, how much do we have to do? How many things, like?
Somewhere between nothing and everything is what you need to do. I mean, that's the challenge with this stuff. There's no one ring to rule them all. There is no perfect approach. So
Nerd.
if you're hung up on finding the right way to do things and the perfect way, number one, stop that. This is going to be a little different for everybody, depending on your capacity, where you're at, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's SWOT analysis. And again, you can Google SWOT and you'll find all sorts of. I think the main thing here is to set aside some time, especially in these sort of annual resets, to do some analysis. But like anything else, analysis paralysis is a real thing. Don't do this all month long.
Yeah, that's what I worry about with this. Is I don't want to overcomplicate it. In fact, I'm trying to simplify it, because it doesn't help for us to just look at, where do I want to go? What are my dreams? What are my plans for 2021 without first looking back and assessing where we are? And I want to boil it down to the simplest things that we can do that give us the information that we need so that we can start and have a better year than we had before. Because we're always, we want to grow. So, okay, so let's just review really quickly. When we look back, we want some kind of document.
If you have a document,
use
it.
Great.
If you don't,
just write it down in some simple way. Right?
What went well in 2020?
What didn't?
What didn't? What are the lessons?
What did we learn? Okay, great. And then when we assess where we are, a SWOT analysis is probably a really simple tool.
It's a great, simple tool for
Love it.
Assessing where you are.
And if you need some outside perspective, it's helpful.
I would say
if you need, everybody needs.
Everybody could benefit from some outside perspective.
Perfect. Yeah.
Prioritize that.
Fabulous. Okay. So now we're focused on what we can do, where we can go. This is often where people start, right? Like, let's just talk about moving forward. Or maybe I'm just talking about myself. I'm like, let's just dream. Let's just believe. Let's just go big. Right? And now we've done some of the work. What are the tools that we need?
To look forward, I do think it's a great time, especially if you haven't, to start building some sort of document that you can use to hold yourself accountable to, especially if you've got a team. Having some sort of document is a way to hold each other accountable, but it's just a really important way to keep everybody aligned so that everybody's working towards the same priorities.
Right.
A lot of folks do. They create some document at the beginning of the year, and then they don't look at it or touch it again until the end of the year. If that's the case, you're going to get, you'll get some value out of that, but not nearly the amount of value that you can as when you're regularly looking at using that.
Right.
I'm not a big fan of strategic plans that are 20 pages long and all filled with all these dense paragraphs that nobody has got any energy or inclination to pick up throughout the course of the year.
Okay, build the what we call a VTO, which means...
So a VTO stands for Vision Traction Organizer, which some called EOS. It's an entrepreneurial operating system. You may have heard it referred to as just traction. This all comes out of the brain of a guy named Gino Wickman. Gino's got several books out there, one of which is called Traction, which is a great place to start. And what Traction is a set of best practices around keeping a team clear on priorities, or even just a solopreneur focused on priorities. It's a collection of best practices. None of it's rocket science, but it is a nice handbook for just about any small business,
right,
on getting clear about where they want to go.
Okay, so we have a VTO. We set the VTO at the beginning of the year, and then I'm definitely famous for not going back to it consistently, partly because things change and it feels no longer super applicable. So when do you adjust the plan? Like at what point, especially in this past year, when I think about, like, there were times and where it was like, change in course, shifting here, moving this way instead of that way. And now that plan that was set under totally different circumstances feels out of touch. So do you just rewrite? Do you create a new VTO, or can you adjust it as you go along?
Well, you can, yeah, absolutely, you can adjust as you go. I mean, again, take 2020 as an example. If you set a plan in January and at the end of the first quarter, in March, by the end of March, you weren't making some adjustments. I think most of us had to make some adjustments there. So yeah, absolutely. Reality is always out there, may adjust our plans. If our plan is changing every month, if that's the reality, you really need to change your plan every month, then why are you planning in the first place? My suspicion is that if you are really changing the plan that frequently, or even changing the plan every quarter, it's probably an indication that you haven't really gotten clear on what your top priorities are yet. So again, it comes back to having a candid conversation. I think it's also, it points towards the value of having some group providing some outside perspective, whether your team or some trusted friends out there. If you're really starting from zero, if you've never done any sort of strategic planning with any regular follow-up practice, I think that one of the simplest things you can do is set up a quarterly meeting, put it on your calendar every 3 months, dedicate at least 2 or 3 hours to it. And better yet, if you are on your own, find a few people. Maybe you want to set a whole day if you've got other folks who have solo in it as well. Set a whole day and give a chunk of the day to each of you to go through this stuff. But that's going to build in some accountability right there. If you now have 4 appointments on the calendar for 2021, where other folks are expecting to see you with some sort of really simple report on how you did against your quarterly goals, you're going to approach things a heck of a lot differently than if it's just you and you can just blow off that appointment.
Totally. Okay. I like this. And Andy just gave me an idea. So here's what I want to do. I'm going to add into Movers U a quarterly, just a work session that we can do where we can all show up together on Zoom and do a very simple process of where have we been? Let's look at the document. What went well? What didn't? What have we learned? Do a SWOT analysis for ourselves and our business, and then check in on our VTO, essentially, like what the big goals are around our quarterly plan. And just for myself, because it'll hold me accountable to doing it, and then invite some other people who want to do that. So for those of you who are in Movers U or who want to join us in Movers U for that, we're gonna do that. I just said it out loud. We're gonna do that. So it'll be like a few hours on Zoom once a quarter as we step into the quarter.
That sounds great.
I like starting things. That'll be fun. This is super helpful, and I appreciate what you're doing here is saying it can be really simple, but bring some other people in as you look back, look at where you are and look at where you're going. to add in a little accountability, because it's really easy for us, especially when we're doing this on our own, especially when we're like, I think there's been some level of panic in the past 8 months, right? I'm feeling it with the people I'm working with, where it's like, I gotta do something, and try this and that, and that, like, that's not planning. It's being, maybe retroactively responsive. Sometimes we have to do that, but the more we can get into this rhythm of planning and strategy and leaning on it and knowing that, yes, okay. So, Andy, is there anything else that you're thinking of that you're like, before we finish this conversation?
Keep it simple. You don't need to overcomplicate it, but don't skip this stuff. Don't be afraid of accountability. And
I gotta write that.
Again, this is not about reward and punishment. This is about learning. You and I were talking the other day. I came across some great line. It goes something along the lines of, you can't do what you want until you know what you're doing. And part of what this process is going to help bring to light is getting really clear on what you're doing and force you to get really clear on what you want.
So everybody write that down. You can't do what you want until you know what you are doing.
Yeah,
now,
we've kind of talked about these 3 conversations. Where have you been? Where are you? And where you want to go?
So literally, like, every day am I making choices about what I'm doing versus just being like, I don't know, I'm just doing whatever.
Yes. I mean, you said earlier, I love planning. I love possibility. You love talking about what you want. But until you're really clear on what you're doing, it's going to be hard to get that in line with what you want.
So it brings us back to my favorite Andy story. My favorite is maybe too strong of a word, but the quintessential Andy story. Would you share it, please?
So a story I share often with clients is around the one philosophy course I took in college and the opening day lecture that I remember very clearly. Professor asking us all, first thing he said to us was, what's the most important philosophical question of all time? We responded with all the questions.
Why am I here?
Yeah.
Is there a God?
Absolute moral truth, all the cliche, big philosophical questions. And he sort of patted us on the head and said, those are all great guesses, but none of those are the most important question of all time. The most important question of all time, and he went to the blackboard and wrote this, is, what should I do today? And I got that kind of like a sledgehammer between the eyes. Yeah. Right? Only reason we ask all those big questions, why am I here? Who am I? What's the meaning of life? Is because every morning we wake up with that question, what should I do today?
How am I living?
Yeah.
This one precious life. Who says that? I think Mary Oliver.
Somehow, some
one
way.
Wild and precious life or something.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful quote.
Every one of us answers that question by the time we go back to bed at the end of the day. That question gets answered. But to what we were saying earlier, do you know how you answer that question? Are you aware of how you're answering that question? Are you reflecting?
Are you intentionally answering that question?
Are you spending your day focused on a specific set of priorities, or are you letting whatever shows up in the email inbox, whatever grabs your fancy that day, dictate that answer for you? Taking some time for some planning is so that you can get what you want, what you really should be doing, in line with what you're actually doing. And having that regular conversation with yourself, when you see those gaps, you say, okay, this is what's most important to me, but here's how I spent today or the last week or the last month. And then on the same page, again, then there's just another question. Why is there a gap? Right. Is it because I really need to change some ways about how I'm operating to get more aligned with what I should be doing? Or am I not clear yet enough on what I really should be doing?
Yeah. Well, to wrap all this up, what's underneath the story that you just told is an ultimate orientation around our values and our purpose. Like, what is this all for ultimately? And I know that's how you start all of your work with clients, and that's how we need to start any sort of planning, is using the filter of, why am I here? Like, what do I want to bring out into this world? And using that as a filter, even when we look back and assess, because things might have gone really well in some area. Like, yeah, I made a lot of money, but I'm miserable because this is not how I want to live and be and do. And so I want to shift in some way. Yep. Like, that assessment is really important. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. All right. Well, thanks for coming. Good job.
Thanks for including me.
Yeah. Yay. Thanks so much, Andy. It's always fun to share, Andy's brain with all of you, but also, I don't know, it's sometimes kind of fun it's another way to get to know me a little bit. I had never done a 2-person interview in the same room. I've been doing everything so virtually. It's just another technological challenge. So thanks for bearing with me on that. And most importantly, I really wanted you to hear some of his insights. You might have heard me mention that I am doing a planning session, a strategy session for all of you on December 14th, which is in a week. So together in this 90-minute session, we are going to set your 2021 speaking goals and the path to reaching them. So if you are at the stage, if you're at the level of speaking where you are starting to think about how you can earn revenue with your speaking, how you can really grow your audience with your speaking, well, this is a really powerful opportunity. It's $29, and together we're going to figure out exactly how speaking is fitting in your business, how it can fit in your business, and then the kinds of opportunities that will really help catapult you out front. So it's a 90-minute session over on Crowdcast, and I'd love to help you get clearer on how you can really utilize speaking in 2021 to help you grow your audience and grow your revenue. So to join us, go to bemove.com/2021. Thanks for joining me this week on the show, and I can't wait to see you next week. In the meantime, this moved me. What is moving you? I'd love to hear. I'd love to know.